What's up, nerds? Today's guest is Dan Woods, F5's VP of the Shape Security Intelligence Center. Dan's going to tell us about inherent vulnerabilities, his time as a beat cop in the CIA and the FBI. Dan Woods, welcome to Pirate Radio.
Great to be here, Matt.
So, Dan, you spent 25 years in law enforcement, ranging from being a beat cop to the CIA and the FBI. You've been a member or you've been employed at a Russian human click farm. You've got a very interesting background. From all of your pre-F5 Shape Security experience, what's your favorite declassified story from your time at three-letter agencies?
Well, you're really tying my hands when you say it has to be declassified.
Hey, if it's classified, go ahead too. It's just you and me.
Well, I'd certainly say that my time at CIA was some of my favorite years of my life. Traveling the world, meeting with human intelligence sources, and working with them to exploit the computer systems that they had access to was pretty exciting. I really enjoyed it. But there are also aspects about working as an FBI agent I enjoyed. But frankly, I think what prepared me most for life and my career was working as a beat cop, going from call to call, seeing the endless manifestations of ignorance, teaching me the importance of an education, engaging in dozens of interviews and interrogations per day. That really helped me grow as an individual.
That's very cool. You're our second interviewee that's spent time as a beat cop. Howard Hale from Sisters of Charity, who's now the CISO over there, was spent time as a beat cop as well, and he has kind of similar feelings towards it. So that's interesting. The common threads there.
Yeah, it's eye-opening when you. In fact, I'd encourage anybody listening to go on a ride along with your local police department. Everything you see in the media today about law enforcement, they get it all wrong, and you can learn the truth just by simply going on a few ride-alongs and getting to know those beat officers. And
you suggest that you get to know them and sit in the front seat instead of don't get to know them and sit in the back seat.
Exactly. You do not want to be in the back seat. And you want to make sure you don't have any warrants when you go for your ride along, because I had a guy come to ride along with me, and the first thing we do is we check people for warrants. And I told him, I said, look, I have good news and bad news. Good news is you will be doing a ride along with me. The bad news is you will be in the back seat.
And it will be right now.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, make sure you don't have any warrants.
Well, the good people that process the running red lights in Greenwood Village, Colorado. I'm not going to do mine in Greenwood Village, Colorado, because I feel like I get one of those once every week. I don't know what I've paid, what I haven't. So, the red light cams are my only concern, Dan.
Yeah, and I share your concern. I don't like replacing beat officers with computers and robots. I think that there's a lot of judgment that goes into whether or not somebody gets a citation, and cameras and robots aren't capable of making that judgment.
Yep. No, that sounds very on the nose. So, let's get started here, Dan. So, your team at Shape Security and F5 is building security solutions for inherent vulnerabilities. What is the difference between an inherent vulnerability and the traditional security threats IT organizations have addressed with tools like firewalls?
Well, inherent vulnerabilities can't be patched, right? Like an inadvertent vulnerability can, like SQL injection, cross-site scripting. Those can be fixed. They can be patched. They can be removed with good security hygiene. An inherent vulnerability is something like, your public-facing login page. You are vulnerable to credential stuffing because you have a public-facing login page. The only way to patch it would be to take down the login page, which of course you cannot do. It's typically a critical business requirement. So since you have a login page, it's public-facing, then bad actors can just try millions of username password pairs against that login application. And when you're trying, tens of millions, even billions, we've seen attacks go into the billions, you end up taking over a lot of accounts. So that's really the difference between inherent and inadvertent. It's whether or not they can be patched in a traditional sense.
So with those inherent vulnerabilities, the login pages, the shopping carts, et cetera, um, what do IT organizations need to worry about with those web-facing applications and web-facing portals?
Well, that they're going to be targeted. They're going to be targeted, not just login, but and add to cart, but forgot password or create account. Think about a company that offers some sort of incentive to open an account. Maybe it's a free cup of coffee or a free donut, or maybe a $10 discount on a future purchase. Well, somebody can use automation, use bots, and create tens of thousands, even millions of accounts. Maybe an enterprise gives away some perk on your birthday. Well, you can create 365 accounts, each with a different birthday, and share or enjoy that benefit every day of the year. Or you can create thousands and enjoy it multiple times per day, or share it with your friends. So everything that's public facing, you have to think about it from a fraudster, from attacker's perspective. Is there an incentive, even just a perceived incentive, for somebody to launch automation against the application? It doesn't always have to be monetary. It could be intelligence gathering, and it doesn't have to be a real benefit, just a perceived benefit. You think about it, burglars break into empty safes all the time because they perceive there's going to be something of value in the safe. So if a bad actor thinks there's something of value in the account, they're going to try to take over the account using credential stuffing. If they think there's some value in creating tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions synthetic accounts, then they will use automation to do that. So really, it's just, you got to be aware of the incentive that your applications are serving up for bad actors.
I suggest we call that the Geraldo Rivera scenario, the vault with nothing in it
Yes.
scenario. So yeah,
Al Capone's safe, yeah, his vault.
yes,
Right. I remember that, although we are dating ourselves.
We are dating ourselves, and I don't know if I understood what was happening live. I think I'm just under the threshold for being conscious at that point, but knowing who Geraldo Rivera was would have been a stretch. So you've outlined, what these threats look like, what people are trying to do. How much bigger of a problem are these inherent vulnerabilities than the average business understands?
I'd say it's probably 10x what the average business understands, because we've gone in line, meaning we've deployed our countermeasures at many enterprises. And prior to giving them the report on how much of their traffic is malicious automation, we always try to ask, how much of the traffic do you think is malicious? And it isn't uncommon for them to say, well, we've been doing battle with these bats for a few years, so we think we have it largely under control. Probably 20 to 30% of the traffic is malicious bots. And then we say, well, it's actually, 98% of all your traffic is malicious bots. And 98% isn't a record. We regularly see 99%. We've seen 99.9% of all traffic hitting origin being malicious bots. So yeah, think about the consequences of that. That's pretty jaw dropping. My time at FBI and CIA and as a beat cop, I saw a lot of interesting things. But I have to admit, when I got to F5 shape, and I saw some of these attacks, I was really blown away at their size and scope. And it's largely because they're not coming from a few dozen IP addresses anymore. Over the years of being mitigated by IP address, these attackers have learned, and they've become highly distributed. It's not uncommon for us to see attacks coming from millions of IP addresses, and enterprises, they'll typically catch the first, maybe dozen or 100 IPs that are the noisiest, but they'll miss the long tail of over 1 million IPs that are responsible for maybe only 15 or 20 transactions each, but they make up 70 to 80% of the attack.
That's imagine if you're a beat cop and 99.8% of your interactions were with criminals. It'd be difficult.
It'd be a long day, that's for sure.
Yes. Only that Greenwood Village, Colorado camera gets to be right 100% of the time with the bad guys.
That's right.
So Shape Security's got a fun pedigree. It's founded by Google engineers. Came out of stealth mode in 2014, was acquired by F5 in 2019. You've been with Shape for many years. Um, Obviously, it's a smart team. There were strong insights and foresight that inherent vulnerabilities were going to become a growing problem for businesses. Um, but if you could go back 7 years, what threats do you think the industry and the Shape team may have underestimated originally?
That's a good question. I guess real quick, I'll add that not only were we founded by Google engineers, also by Department of Defense personnel. So these are people who had a lot of visibility into these attacks very early on, hitting the Department of Defense and the intelligence community. So they took a lot of that knowledge, both from click fraud at Google and the attacks against the DoD and the IC, and that was really what gave birth to Shape. But what did we over or underestimate? I think that what's coming to mind now is something that we overestimated. And so that's not exactly the answer to your question, but I think it's interesting. We really overestimated the sophistication of the attackers. 6-7 years ago, when we came out of stealth and kind of launched our countermeasure, we were expecting to see the same sophisticated attackers that our founders saw hitting DoD and the IC, when in fact that level of sophistication didn't manifest in the private sector for years. So our countermeasures were way more sophisticated than they needed to be to deal with many of the attackers early on. Of course, over the last year, we're starting to see some criminal organizations, some bad actors really start to match some of the levels of sophistication we saw. And we also actually see state actors operating against our customers. And of course, when you have unlimited resources and time, and you're not necessarily driven by money, you're driven by intelligence gathering, then you're capable of some very sophisticated attacks. So I guess the short answer is I don't recall anything we underestimated, but we certainly overestimated the level of sophistication of attackers.
Well, it probably gave you a good chance to get ahead of the novices. So were they were the original attackers state sponsored, focused on Department of Defense, and then with Shape Security, you were exposed to bad actors, mom's basement, 18-year-old, trying to hit Starbucks or a customer with, somebody they could get gift cards from?
Yeah, early on, that's exactly what we saw. But as we did battle with attackers and they started to evolve and our countermeasures got more and more sophisticated, then, we're almost kind of the victim of our own success. Had Shape not come on board to force these attackers to evolve and get more sophisticated, they probably wouldn't have. But we forced them to become more sophisticated. And really, it's unfortunate because, Shape is able to protect all of its customers, but these same sophisticated actors are launching attacks against enterprises that are not in the Shape network. So hopefully that they're going to be joining the Shape network soon, or they're developing something that can keep up with some of these attacks. Giving an example of what I mean by a sophisticated attacker. A sophisticated attacker would come from a highly distributed attack infrastructure. So, probably hundreds of thousands or millions of IP addresses. And they wouldn't come from, say, all over the world or from one country. They would come from the countries that the target's customers are associated with. So, in other words, their traffic would blend in with the legitimate customer traffic. And then finally, they'll be very, very good at spoofing devices and very, very good at spoofing human interaction. Their mouse movements, their keystrokes will have human-like entropy. They'll even their devices, like one example, we study the way devices and the way browsers do floating point math. And we can tell if the user agent string says they're Edge, but they're doing floating point math like Chrome, we know they're lying. Well, the really sophisticated attackers start to spoof all of those signals really, really well. But we come out on top. We make it so that these attackers, they're too expensive for it to be profitable for them. So they typically either move on to a softer target, or we see them evolve to just really human click farms, where they're just using humans sitting somewhere doing their best to launch the attacks. And of course, these are humans, so they have entropy in their mouse movements and keystrokes. But there are some other things that we've identified unique to human bad actors, such as navigating workflows lightning fast.
It's nice to see the bad actors getting back to basics. Just fundamentals. Just click farms of hundreds of state-sponsored bad actors.
Right. What always gives us the advantage is the reason they spoof all these signals is to try to hide in the noise, but they have no idea what the noise looks like. They might use the top 10 most popular user agents on the internet, but those aren't necessarily the top 10 most popular user agents among our customers' traffic. So it's those sorts of anomalies that allow our AI and ML systems to fire off alerts that are then reviewed by humans. I think this is why we've been as successful as we have.
That's fantastic. So you continue to sort of raise the bar, to protect against inherent vulnerabilities. What's the next generation of things? As you try to stay, the industry in general tries to stay a step ahead of the bad actors. What are the new vulnerabilities? What are the new technologies that's making the space difficult for anyone providing a solution?
Well, think about, back in the 90s when we'd all be looking for a 0-day exploit. And then once it was discovered, you needed to be pretty sophisticated to, write the code to exploit that 0-day vulnerability. And then there started to kind of develop the code to exploit the vulnerability and making that code available to a bunch of people who they don't have the skills to write the code themselves. I think we're seeing the same thing when it comes to bot attacks. A year or two ago, you needed to be pretty sophisticated to launch a sophisticated bot attack. But now there are a lot of third parties that are making this almost available as a service, where you don't have to have the skills, the coding experience to launch the attack. You don't have to have your own botnet. You can lease these capabilities for a fee, and all that sophistication that is required is shifted from the individual actor to the infrastructure. So I think that's going to be the challenge for many, many enterprises. They're going to see a significant increase in the level of sophistication hitting their web and mobile applications.
So you've got the background with law enforcement, CIA, FBI. How are those agencies doing, in partnership with the commercial space, with customers transact, active in commerce? How are they doing in the partnership to catch and stop at least domestic bad actors?
Yeah, I think FBI and Secret Service, U.S. postal inspectors. I think a lot of the federal law enforcement are doing everything they can. The challenge really is on the private sector. They're not doing everything they can. Oftentimes, they don't reach out to the law enforcement in their area until there's a problem, and they need to reach out and establish a relationship with their local field office right away. And then also they need to involve law enforcement when they've been compromised. Many enterprises, they just don't involve law enforcement. They just want the attack to go away, and they don't want the headlines. But I think that that enterprises would be well served if they just made it a standard practice to go to law enforcement, arm law enforcement with what they need to engage in an investigation, perhaps find the perpetrator and hold them accountable. Right now, with the enterprises not wanting to involve law enforcement, it makes it really hard on law enforcement. And then law enforcement can help, I think, by when private sector companies come to law enforcement and say, "Hey, we've been hacked," that perhaps you can engage in the investigation in as stealthy as a way as possible, to minimize those headlines that the enterprises are so worried about. So I think both the federal or the even local, all law enforcement can do better, but so too can private sector.
Again, back to our first episode with Howard Hale, the CISO for Sisters of Charity. One of his recommendations to other CISOs was, the conversation was around ransomware specifically, but getting ahead of it and making sure you do have those relationships. And so you're echoing his thoughts on that, and what I think responsible CISOs are probably doing. It's scary. The age of you can get you're on the front page of the paper, right? If something goes badly, and people want to put their head in the sand a little bit.
Yeah, they do. Matt, I actually think that there are a lot more ransomware attacks than anyone thinks. I think, when I hear these experts say there are more in the last year than they have been in the previous 5 years or something like that, I don't buy that. I think that they've been going on for decades, and I think there are likely thousands of enterprises that have been hit with ransomware attacks. They paid the ransom and never told anyone. I think if you ask any enterprise, that's their preferred path forward. And if they could do it, they will. And I think there really needs to be, maybe some legislation that says, no, if you are the victim of a ransomware attack, you are required by law to notify, this entity. And if you don't, then the fine should be, significant, to the point where it's advantageous for them to take their head out of the sand and to deal with the problem before them. Otherwise, they're paying it. It's like paying the kidnappers. It just incentivizes more of what you don't want.
Well, it sounds like some of that legislation is coming down for mission critical infrastructure, for hospitals, for cities, municipalities, things like that. But yeah, I think it probably needs to be something that the public and private sector are partnered on. That it's there's an expectation that it's not gonna be reflected on your taxes as $1 million worth of cryptocurrency for the company party, whatever. That's something exactly. where people are trying to avoid the negative press.
Yeah, although I have to say the line between what is critical infrastructure and what is not isn't very clear. There are a lot of organizations that maybe, according to the letter of the definition, aren't critical infrastructure, but perhaps should be. You think about just a bank. If a bad actor, a state actor, perhaps logged into, took over hundreds of accounts in a day, but didn't do anything to monetize that access. They didn't add a payee, send money to the payee. They didn't do anything. They just continued to access the account day after day after day for years, and every day add more compromised accounts to their inventory, and then one day decide to monetize all of them. That could cause a run on the banks, which would have obviously a devastating impact on the economy. So even a small community bank in some way is part of our critical infrastructure, at least when you look at it in the context of the types of attacks that are possible.
And you could look at tier one technology companies, F5's peers. If one of them were to be hit, what kind of exposure is that? The SolarWinds kind of stuff. These scenarios where relevant technology to a lot of private and public sector folks gets compromised, and it's a very hard line to draw between critical and non-critical infrastructure.
Right. And then if you have, say, enterprises that are competing with one another, but one of them is burdened with the label of being critical infrastructure and having all of these onerous requirements to satisfy, and the other one isn't, then you're going to have a problem. I really think it's incumbent upon everybody, private sector and the government, to make sure every single enterprise is well secured. And sadly, that's not happening. It's really left up to every individual enterprise to do things as they wish. And one of the things I do for F5 Shape is to do security assessments for these Global 2000. So I'll go in and look at their web and mobile applications, look at the way they're configured, look at the workflows, and look at all the different ways that a bad actor can exploit those inherent vulnerabilities. And I'm telling you, Matt, there are times where I find dozens and dozens of vulnerabilities for an enterprise that just doesn't have any idea what they're doing when it comes to security. And then other times, I just briefed a large electronics retailer the other day, and they are state of the art. They still have some inherent vulnerabilities because, as I mentioned, they're inherent. You can't patch them, but
Yep.
everything else they're doing perfectly, really state of the art. And the contrast between those two enterprises, we need to close that gap and bring everybody up to the level of sophistication that this electronics retailer is sitting at right now.
Well, that's great, Dan. Well, we sure appreciate your time. It's great getting to get your thoughts on inherent vulnerabilities, the state of cybersecurity, et cetera. And we look forward to next time.
I enjoyed it, Matt. Thanks so much.